Welcome to Roots and Ruminants, your podcast for creative and innovative use of farm, pasture, and rangeland. We're going back to the basics of raising and grazing livestock, growing your own forage, and practical land use.
All right, we're back at it. Another episode of Roots and Ruminants coming at you. And once again, I'm Justin Fricky sitting down with Jared Knock, co-host. And we got another special guest. This morning, we've got Lynn Fahrmeier from Wellington, Missouri. And Lynn and I have actually, we've had some conversation in the past about cover crops, about grazing. I think our operations are fairly similar in the fact that we have some sheep. And so we've got that tie and connection, and so we're going to hear his thoughts on all things grazing, and then really connecting with the soil and his thoughts on soil health and his farming practices. And it's going to be interesting to get that perspective from Missouri. I think you're the first Missouri guest, so that's good.
Wow, great!
The Tiger sweatshirt this morning. That's great. Looking good.
Yeah. It's nice down here today. We've got a little snow on the ground, but it's going to warm up and. Actually going to build some fence so we can rotate some cattle. And
there we go.
Yeah. And I think we've got, the three of us have another connection that you might not know about, Justin. I think we're all members of Alpha Gamma Rho.
Wow, there we go. Cool.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I was a member of Theta chapter at the University of Missouri back when the earth was cooling in the early 80s. And actually my son was a member here, I don't know, about 8 years ago or so, he was initiated. So, yeah.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Alpha Phi 838.
Yep. There you go. Yeah. 1024.
You know.
Yep. Well, that's great. So Wellington, Missouri, right? Northwestern Missouri. What'd you call it?
Yeah, west central, northwest, depending on which region map you look at. We're actually due east of Kansas City. The Missouri River turns at Kansas City and heads to St. Louis, and we live between the Missouri River and I-70, about 40 miles east of Kansas City, on the Los Hills, or Los Hills, however you want to pronounce it, that were left when the glaciers retreated. So yeah, we farm about, 2,000 acres or 1,700 acres of row crops, and then we've got pasture and timber. The original farmstead was settled by my grandfather after the Civil War, so it's been in the family about 125 years. And my grandpa expanded it. My dad expanded it some. I've expanded it a little bit. And so I kind of joke, Germans don't raise sheep. And so when my wife and I got married, 27 years ago now, we got married a little later in life. It just took me a long time to figure that whole thing out. But she was moving from central Missouri up here to Wellington, and instead of changing jobs, we knew we wanted to try to start a family pretty fast. So it was like, well, is there another enterprise that we could put on the farm that would generate some income? And we thought about sheep, but I didn't want to shoot her. And she says, well, I heard about this crazy breed of sheep that has hair that you don't shear. And so that's how we found the Katahdins. And back then, you had to drive a ways to find Katahdins here in the Midwest. And so we visited 4 or 5 different breeders. And the second year that we were married, we started with a flock of 12 ewes and 1 ram from Lynn Fahrmeier, Laura and Doug, out there in Fairview, Kansas. And we liked the sheep, but we fell in love with the people, I think, is what I like to say to a large extent. And so back in the 90s, we got out of the hog business. I think if I had to do it over, I might have called Cargill and said, we'll build the buildings the way you want it, and sign a contract with you, because I think that manure is valuable. But we just totally got out of the hog business, and for a short period of time, we were even out of the cattle business. But I'm custom grazing a cow-calf herd now for a friend of mine, and that's working good. And so, yeah, trying to figure out how to utilize cover crops. And if one thing is evident by the end of this podcast, it'll be that I'm the poster child on how not to do things the first time. But hopefully, by the second or third time around, I kind of figure it out.
Okay. So, Lynn, when you talked about you got out of cows for a while, you've got some grazing acres, some pasture acres in the hills and stuff that you utilize. Were you renting those out, and then you kind of took them back over into the operation, and then used the cover crops in the aftermath as the rest of the grazing pieces? Or tell me about what it looked like when you removed that piece, and then how you put it back in.
Yeah, well, I'm really fortunate. My sister married a large farmer in the area as well. And so I rented the pasture out to him for hay ground. And so actually, even now with the custom grazing arrangement that I have to provide all forage. And so I'm actually buying hay from my brother-in-law that was produced on my ground. So, but it works because that way I don't have to have a baler and all that equipment, and so I think it's working good.
So do you keep the cattle then year-round, or are they basically just for the main grazing season? Okay, you calve them and everything?
Yeah, no, I keep them year-round. He provides all of the vet care, AI breeding services. I just have to have him near the working facilities on the days that he's going to show up. So, and then he does provide some concentrated feeds. Like right now, we're feeding some soy pellet hulls and some DDGs just to provide a little extra protein while they're out there on corn stalks.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So the sheep side of the operation, along with the custom cattle grazing operation, how do they work in sync, or how do you see them benefiting one another, or do they?
Yeah, that's a good question. My goal is to make it complement each other. We're probably not there yet, partially because of fencing, and also partially because for a few years, I played around with some organic certified grain, and so we were going to have summer cover crops as part of that extended rotation. And I tell you what, guys, with all due respect to the organic community, I just cannot bring myself to do the amount of tillage that's necessary to be an organic producer. So we've let that piece drop by the wayside. And I know there are some people in Indiana that are doing no-till organic, but I'm not too sure it's going to work on hill ground. Flat, because when we talk hill ground here, we're up to 10%, 12% slopes at places. Everything's on contours with terraces, and so if the fields are square, even with a slight slope, I could see how maybe you could do that. But on our hills, I'm not too sure no-till organic is going to work. So we've changed a little bit. I think we'll still use a lot of crop residue and cover crops in between crops. We're using more wheat in the rotation, although when you look at the price of wheat today, you have to wonder if you want to do that. And so it's all a balancing act of finances and soil health goals. And so my goal is to run the cattle and the sheep together, but my fences have to be right. Justin maybe has it figured out. I don't. You have to be a really good grazer to, I think, keep sheep in electric wire. You can't let them get hungry and push against it. And so, and we also need to train my sheep to electric fence. Most of my ewes have not seen an electric fence because they've been inside of woven wire fences all their life. And so to go back, I mean, I have grazed cover crops with sheep before, but it's been several years ago. It works. You just have to train the animals to stay inside those electric wires.
So my experience that has been on my hair sheep is that they're always going to go underneath and not through it. And so I've had to put that kind of root wire like you did back in the old days where with the hog fence, where you need to put that wire tight about 3 inches off the ground, barb, and then that keeps them from doing that. And that slows them up for when they come and hit the hot wire. That's how I've been able to do it on permanent fences, is kind of that 3-inch, 4-inch wire, and then right above that. Now, maintaining a barbed wire 3 or 4 inches off the ground is no fun. I understand that. That's what I've had to do on permanent fences that I do around here, where I keep them year round, especially if I'm feeding hay in those areas and stuff where I know they're going to get a little more pressure and try and push it out.
Yeah, man, I agree. That's the challenge. My son and I, we were moving some wire yesterday for the cows, and we're just moving a single wire, and that's all it takes. And with sheep, even well-trained sheep, 2-3 wires, and then the strategy of how high that bottom wire is, and it's. I mean, we've got some pretty big fencers, so we can keep it hot, but we have to keep them in. And then also, I've got a couple of guard dogs, and my theory is I don't like my neighbor's dogs roaming, and I don't want to be that guy that has my guard dogs roaming, and so I want them to stay inside too. And so, it's just a matter of. I think it's just a matter of time and management, and sometimes in the spring of the year, honestly, if I'm planting corn, sometimes the sheep don't get the priority maybe they should, and then that's when I get into trouble with the sheep. So
if you give them one opportunity to touch that hot wire when it's not hot, game over. And that same one knows that she can now push through it, even if it is hot. She's ducking it, or she's going through it. So that's, I think that is definitely the key. It's got to be hot, and it's always got to stay hot, because once it's not, if they go through once, it's bad news. Game over. But you said a lot of really interesting things there, and I kind of want to go back to, maybe you described the landscape that you're farming there, and obviously it sounds like you've got a steep grade, and so that's definitely a challenge. And so I'm curious, is it pretty much all no-till farming in that area, or are people still doing tillage, or what does that look like as far as other people in that community?
Both. More and more no-till, more definitely a lot of conservation tillage. A lot of guys will no-till soybeans, but then they'll use a soil finisher or something ahead of corn. And like this last summer, we didn't get much rain this year. We were extremely dry, but we did get some rain, timely rain in July, so we had a good corn crop. We were blessed with the yields, but we did get one hard rain, I don't know, late May, something like that. And I was a little disappointed because I went out and scouted some fields, and we still have runoff, even on some of my longer-term no-till fields, and but at least the water coming off was clear, and the water coming off my neighbor's ground was, it was dirty, and so I'm happy about that. Getting water infiltration up, I think, is a challenge for us for whatever reason, clay content or past farming practices. It just you hear these stories about, my ground can hold 5 inches an hour. And, well, maybe I'll get there someday, but I'm not there yet. But we're moving in that direction. But just the mere fact that we had clear runoff, I thought was, promising. And Lafayette, it's kind of interesting. Lafayette County, Missouri, at one time, we had more miles of terraces and grass waterways than any county in the state of Missouri. So there's definitely an ethic, I guess, ethos, whatever, in this area of soil conservation. But yet, when it came to no-till, people weren't really willing to jump in with both feet. And, I think we know now that, tillage oxidizes a lot of nutrients. And so, your yields will be better if you do a little tillage. Because you're burning up organic matter and releasing those nutrients. And so you got to have a really long-term view, and that's what's hard, I think, for humans, is to look beyond, Christmas and, how did the farm do this year? And so trying to take a long-term view while staying in business is hard.
Yeah, you said that right, and that's so true. I think we're probably seeing that with just the cover crop movement that's happening now. Right? Did I get that quick yield bump that can sometimes be expected, or did I get a yield drag that can sometimes be expected? And if you're a conventional farmer and you're just using cover crops to hold the ground, maybe fix a little bit of nitrogen, but really use it just for organic matter building and erosion protection. If you're not grazing it, you do need to see some sort of profitability measurement in that cover crop.
Yeah.
And we definitely believe that comes, but if it's not instant gratification for our quick instant gratification society that we live in, it's really tough to hold on to it and continue to use the practices.
And so when a lot of the conversations I have within AgSpire are thought leaders and basically purchasing leaders for major food companies that are buying things that want to see a transition to regenerative ag. And they've been hearing some of the kind of loud gospel-like voices of like, nothing ever goes wrong when you plant a cover crop. You know what I mean? Your yields go up, everything is great. And they're kind of convinced of that. And they just go, farmers just need to know about cover crops and they'll just do them all the time. And it's like, no, there's a lot of nuance here. And no one in, Millborn Renova was ever, advocated or allowed to go out and say, plant cover crops to get your money back the next year and a yield bump like boots. And there's a lot of people in the food community, food companies that have listened to some of our messages from fellow people in soil health that say, yep, it's all great. There's never go backwards. It's always 100 steps ahead. There's never a step back. And it's done a bit disservice, I think, to folks that are experiment and on trying to learn that nuance. They feel like they're a failure if they have any failures, that they're a complete failure. So I think it's fair to talk about the progress that we've made and things we've tried, things that worked and haven't, because when we don't do that, it really puts people at a disadvantage.
Jared, no doubt, you nailed it, and I'm the poster child for how things should not work. Because I listened to those podcasts, I went to those seminars, and okay, part of it's my own personality. I'll admit, I'm all in. Okay, so hairy vetch is great. Let's sell more of it, and sort on everything or whatever. And I've had disasters and expensive disasters, and so part of it was I'll take the blame for jumping in too fast. I'll take the blame for being overly optimistic. But, at the same time, I think some of these people are probably correct that if you can do everything correct from day one, you may not ever see a yield drag. But I think the question is I look at how much I've changed my planter setup, and I've spent over $100,000 remodeling my planter over the last 5 years. Well, had I done that year one, I may not have had some of those disasters. Yeah. But $100,000 in 1 year just to remodel a planter is a lot of money. And so I think that's what's not talked about. And I don't think fertility is talked about enough. Where we place nitrogen is so important in a cover crop system. It has to be I think it has to be applied later, and it needs to be applied closer to the row. And then you alleviate some of those early season nutrient tie-up problems. And I also think that maybe year 1, 2, 3, depending on where you're at, I think it makes a difference north to south. I think it makes a difference east to west. I'm kind of in a southwest corner of some people say I'm not even in the Corn Belt, but if I am, I'm on the southwest corner. I think maybe I need to increase my fertilizer uses in years 1, 2, and 3, maybe 4, and then I'll be able to start reducing my fertilizer use. And I think that's the thing that's not talked about publicly enough, and I don't think the research is being done either to figure out
how to get there.
Where okay, so not to name any names, but I have used a lot of different biological products in furrow from major companies, and I've never had one cause me to have a yield increase, or at least I think one did have a yield increase, but wasn't an economical yield increase. All the others reduced my yield compared to putting nothing in furrow. And that's not a popular thing to say. And the best, I've done a lot of searching, soul searching, as well as just asking a lot of experts. And the best thing that we came up with was, for whatever reason, my soils with a PFLA test will show that I have non-detectable protozoa. And protozoa is necessary to break down the bacteria and these biological products to make the nutrients available. And so until I have protozoa populations built up in my soil, I think I have to be careful using some of these biological products. Now, that's not to say that 3 or 4 years from now that's going to change, and I'm hoping with livestock we can accelerate that process. But I think between PFLA test, Haney test, and some of that stuff, there's a lot that we need to learn about transitioning ground into a full-blown soil health paradigm, because it can be a disaster, and then you burn people forever.
I think I made the analogy in this podcast before about trying to introduce biology without just blanket, right? Just throw it in and see what happens. It's kind of like getting 1,000 head of short-term, freshly shorn ewes dropped off at my place in the middle of January in a lot with no feed or no water and no protection.
Yeah.
I don't know if they survive, right? I don't know if we have the environment to introduce biology like that. We can throw a whole lot of living things out there, but this is a hot zone, right? Everything is out to eat everything as soon as it hits the ground. And so it was a couple of years ago, and I'm not going to quote whose study it was, because I looked for it and I couldn't find it, but I'm going to see this person actually next week. I'm going to ask him about it. But there was a study that was done a couple of years ago about 30 different biologicals, and they went out and tried to show this response, and it was replicated, and it was very specific, short, row length, partial field type stuff. And they saw a short-term response as a foliar biological application, and they saw a short-term response. But they also saw a short-term response, as far as vegetation growth with sugar, right? And
Yeah.
so but then when they went out, the true test was when they went out at the end of the year, 3 months later, 4 months later, they tried to actually find the DNA sequences of the biology they put out there. So forget about yield. Like, are these things even alive out here? Did they reproduce? Did they actually acclimate to the soil? And they couldn't find any of them.
Yeah.
And so the short-term like foliar response that a lot of people see could just be the fact that they put a whole bunch of bacteria out there for their other biology to eat, and it was a food source, and so you saw a little flush, just as you
Yeah.
would if you would put straight up sucrose out there. So anyway, I don't want to hammer too much on biologicals, but I think it's a little naive that we can take a really complex living system and an ecosystem like soil and think that we can just blanket put freeze-dried bacteria from another environment in there and just have them flourish as if it was kind of some dead, sterile environment that was just looking for, for another species.
Totally agree. And again, in those companies' defense, I'm sure all products work somewhere.
Yeah.
We just need to figure out why they're working and where they're needed. And I haven't found it yet, but I keep looking.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a complex system, no doubt.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think we have to keep trying. I mean, I think things are changing so fast that, to some extent, we can't wait for 5-year replicated small plot trials to tell us where we need to go. I mean, I'm 61. I've only got 5 more crops left, maybe, and I want to make as much progress as we can. And so, okay, so maybe we don't have one part of this puzzle figured out, but we do know that soil armor and cover crops and living roots and animal integration all work. And so let's keep working on what we know, and we'll experiment with what we don't.
Well, and just so
that's
such
great.
a negative.
That's profound.
So I don't end on such a negative note about biologicals. We've had, Justin, we've had conversations in the past with some of these companies on biologicals. Is okay, why don't we try introducing these in the cover crop part of it, right? We have way more species that we can use. We can find something that's symbiotic to it. We can get it acclimated. We can get the population of the beneficial biologicals done ahead of the ensuing crop, right? Instead of before it comes in there. But to my knowledge, that's not something done at all, because if you can't attach to that cash crop, and that yield bump, you don't get anything sold. You don't get anything done. So
again, Jared, I'm weird because actually that's what I'm doing. Most of my biologicals right now, especially anything dried, because my son does have a drone business, so we put some cover crops on with a drone this year, but we're also using the drill yet, and so any dry product I know is not going to get blown away by my vacuum fans on my planter or whatever. That's dropping right down in the furrow with the seed, cover crop seed. And so, I think that's a great point that you made.
Yeah, I think there's ways to do it. I just don't think that putting it with a caustic starter fertilizer in a planter when the soil conditions are just barely warm enough to plant corn is the right timing. And method.
What are your son's aspirations with the drone business? You said you are planting some cover crops with it.
Yeah, this was a learning year. He was hoping to basically do a couple hundred acres for me, and I think he's ended up doing 1,400 acres this fall. So people just kept calling, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there. The drone was a way for him to generate additional income to come back home to help here at the farm. I think a lot of his time or a lot of his income will come during fungicide season on corn and soybeans. Even though I'm kind of moving away from that, that's a growing segment here in the Midwest. So I think one thing that needs to be said for cover crops and aerial applying, whether it's an airplane or a drone, my experience has been 1 year it works really great, 1 year it's okay, and 1 year I'm really frustrated. So a lot of it's just, it's just rainfall. And so one of the things we learned about drones is that on our hills, a controlled descent uses more battery power than climbing. And so battery life is still the limiting factor on these drones. And so trying to follow the contours really chews up a lot of battery power here on our hills. And so I came up with the idea of, well, just find the highest point in the field and go up 20 feet and just fly flat, just fly on a plane. We're still flying lower than an airplane would, and we definitely have better control of when we turn the gate on and off. Because that's one of my complaints is on some of our small fields, I end up, the airplane turns on too slow or too late, and so he's missing the first part of the field, and then he turns off too late, and a lot of my cover crop seed ends up in the timber. And that's nothing against the pilots. I mean, I'm a private pilot myself. I can't imagine those guys that are flying those crop dusters at 200 miles an hour or whatever they're spraying. I mean, they do a great job, but the drone's just a lot more accurate. And so once we started doing that, we could get a lot more acres per hour covered because we weren't running the batteries down so much. So I think next year we'll do that in standing corn 1st of August. As soon as the lower leaves start dropping, we'll be out there putting on cover crops with the drone. And I'm pretty comfortable that will work a lot better than waiting until after harvest. So, of course, that's, we pretty much have, well, it's an oscillation of corn and soybeans. Try not to use the term rotation with that. But we try to put wheat in sometimes, but again, price of wheat right now, I'm not too sure we can afford to put wheat in for another year or two maybe. Last year was great. I had some soft red wheat contracted for $9. That was good. I don't think you can even contract next July delivery for 6 right now. I think it's below 6. So, but anyway, we'll keep using the drone for cover crops where we can and drill other places. And I'm not too sure that, I know the late David Brandt always hated to put cover crops on soybean ground before corn, before he harvested. And I understand the risk, and I may end up kicking myself someday, but it'd be horrible to combine soybeans at Thanksgiving with 4 inches of rye out there, but which is a risk. But I think we may try on a small scale putting some cover crops on soybeans when they start dropping leaves, and
just some of the best
just to get the roots going that sooner.
Yeah, some of the best aerial applied stands I've ever seen have been on soybeans, standing soybeans right before leaf drop. It shades that rock, the moisture in, and it works. Again, risky, but it works fantastic. Okay, Lynn, can I back you up a second? You said something there that I thought was fascinating, more from a physics standpoint, maybe from an agronomic standpoint. But you said that in a drone, a controlled descent takes more energy than an upward climb. Is that because of the design of the drone? Why is that?
Okay, I guess I don't have an amp meter on the drone to prove that, but Samuel will tell you that whenever he's going down, the battery meter really drops.
Drops. Yeah. Okay.
And excuse me for the cough. The other thing, he did crash it once, and it was while it was descending. And it just could not stop itself. Once I mean, he tried to stop it, and it could not generate enough power to slow down before it hit the ground. So,
yeah. I think you know when you started talking about the drone business and the cover crops in general and the success and the failures of it, you said that 1 year's great, 1 year's okay, and the other year's the frustration. And I think maybe the even more frustrating part of that is the year that you don't do it can turn out to be a great year. And this is a great example of that year where we were really dry and we didn't really have much rain for the forecast. But the people that did go ahead and aerial ply rye over top of corn, I mean, those stands are phenomenal. And a lot of it wasn't the moisture so much. Yeah, we got a little bit of rain just at the right time. We had a beautiful October, beautiful November. And so just the right amount of heat too played a big difference in the amount of growth that we could get on that stuff. So yeah, just when you think that it's not going to work, turns out to be pretty good too. So it's just taking that taking that leap of faith and making sure that if it's part of your program, you're going to do it on the acres that need it. And I think that's probably the lesson to be learned there.
Drills are more predictable, but again, we're always later. And so we really did not have a killing. I don't remember when our first killing frost was here in Missouri, but it was really late this year. And even after it froze, it warmed back up. So we've had a lot of cover crop growth this fall, even though it was dry, like you said. So.
Yep. So one thing that I want to get to that I didn't give you a heads up on this, but we play a game called Graze It, Harvest, or Rent It Out.
Oh my, okay.
And what makes this even funner is I didn't prepare it. So, but I've written down a few different scenarios based off of the things that you've said. Okay, so we're gonna have 3 different fields, and you have to choose to either graze it, and you can graze it with your sheep or your cattle. It doesn't matter. You have to harvest one, whether you're gonna chop it for silage or you're gonna hay it. And then the rent it out is maybe it's got the most value, renting it, or maybe it's just such a headache you don't want to deal with it, you don't want to touch it, it's a nightmare, you're going to rent it out. Okay, so here's what we've got a 40-acre field of timber, we've got a 40-acre field of Kentucky 31 fescue, and we've got a 40-acre field of hairy vetch. So none of those are too appealing, but you got to graze one, you got to harvest one, and then you get to rent one out.
Okay, well, I think I'm going to say that everyone has an unfair advantage, and we're close enough to Kansas City that we have a lot of people that will pay for hunting rights, and so the 40 acres of timber is going to get rented out for hunting rights. The 40 acres of Kentucky 31. We know how to graze it. I mean, I guess I may harvest a little bit or chop or just do something with seed head control. But for the most part, we can graze Kentucky 31 with good management. And then I would think hairy vetch, for what I paid for the seed, if I harvested that, I might make some money. I don't know. So
there you go. Okay, so why did you say we're going to clip the seed heads?
Well, the stems and the seed heads is where the endophyte concentrates. And so that's what has to be controlled is actually the leaf tips of Kentucky 31 in the spring will beat alfalfa for protein. And so if you can keep it vegetative, Kentucky 31 is not an evil crop. It's when it starts getting mature, and it will get mature really fast. And so that's a challenge. So going out there and brush hogging it or baling some of it or doing something so that you can keep it as vegetative as possible is great. And then the advantage of Kentucky 31 is if you can put on a little shot of fertilizer in August and get, we joke around here, it always rains during the state fair, which is about the second week of August. And so if you can get a little fertilizer out there, you get a little rain, temperatures start dropping, it will produce a lot of tons of leafy forage, and it has a waxy coating. So when it freezes, that leaf, the nutrients in the leaf are protected a lot better than orchard grass or smooth brome. And so we can graze frosted Kentucky 31 well into the winter. Now you have to strip graze it. You just can't turn the cows out, in a 40-acre pasture, or I guess up in your area, it'd be a 400-acre pasture or whatever. But we have smaller pastures down here. But Kentucky 31 is a great winter feed if you've stockpiled it. So again, it's grazing management. You just set stocking doesn't work, guys. I mean, whether it's cover crops or pasture ground, we need to learn better grazing skills, whether it's with cattle or sheep, to keep these plants vegetative and healthy.
Yep. And is that partially because your winters aren't going to be completely froze up? Like if you're getting the melting and I could see that. Like if we were grazing in October, we would have that. For winter grazing and
when November, freeze up, you freeze up. We very seldom will we freeze up all winter. Yeah.
Sure. Yep.
Then that endophyte toxicity goes away during dormancy. So as once it goes dormant, or just decreased enough where it's not as.
It's just not. The concentration in the leaves is so low that it's. I won't say it goes away, because actually they can find the endophyte toxicity in hay after it's been put up if you're putting up mature Kentucky 31. But if you keep it vegetative, there's just not a lot of toxicity in the leaves. It's mainly the very low crown area of the plant, and then it's in the stems and the seed heads. That's where it concentrates.
Okay.
Yes. And it's an alkaloid is what it is. I mean, there's a lot of endophyte or endophilic symbiotic relationships between plants and fungi, and most of them are good. This one is actually good for the plant, but it's bad for anything that eats it because it's an alkaloid toxin that is a vasoconstrictor in mammals. And so the endophyte toxicity causes the blood vessels in the skin and like the hooves and the tail switches to constrict. And so in cold weather, the animal doesn't get enough blood flow to the extremities to keep their hooves warm, and so they get frostbite. In the summer, they don't get enough blood flow to cool the animal, and so the animal has a higher body temperature. And so that's what the endophyte does to the animal.
Okay. Well, a lot of our listeners, I mean, we have listeners all over the world, right? But especially our listeners based from Northern Plains, are sometimes, surprised to hear for the first time that there's places where you're ranching, all of a sudden the grass gets poisonous. Like, the what? Why would that happen? How would you deal with that? I think it's a testament to the resilience of the Missouri people, how they became the number 2 beef cow-calf state in the country, in a place where occasionally the grass becomes poisonous.
Yeah.
You got to be stubborn to do that.
Yeah, and but the grass itself stays. It persists because of that endophyte. We can overgraze orchard grass and kill it out. It's hard to overgraze Kentucky 31 to the extent that we'll ever die. So, so.
Oh, I hear you. There's a lot of our listeners in the Northern Plains where it's just, it's great grass country, but there's people that have basically probably in their lifetime hardly ever spent, much money on chemistry controlling invasive weeds. They've never had brush control to deal with. They've never had to grub out a stand and reestablish grass seed because it's all native.
Or fertilized pastures.
Never fertilized ever, right? So, there's just a place where it's literally like the cow's grass and salt,
Yeah. Yeah. This is an amazing country with the diversity that we have.
Yeah.
In that close of proximity too.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you drive 10, 12 hours and you've got a completely different grazing system. If you go to, you know, Faith, South Dakota to Wellington, Missouri, completely opposite.
It is. Yeah.
Jared, anything to add on the graze it, harvest it, rent it out? Would you do the same thing?
I have very little context. I don't disagree with that. You know, my perception would have been that the timber has more value, but like when I think of trees in like my part of the world, they're much more like savanna. I mean, there's grass growing in and amongst the trees, right? So
no, we don't have that.
Timber is bare ground and dead leaves and everything underneath that. So, yeah, and I have goats, so I don't think the timber would do much for me. So I'd probably have to go the same way.
Yeah.
And I probably would be, you know, I would probably have a death loss my first time grazing Kentucky 31.
Yeah.
Must go wrong here, right?
Yeah.
We'll be fine.
Now, we did have savannas. I mean, there's a city not too far from me called Savannah, Missouri. So, and like here where I live, we have roads that are called Texas Prairie Road, Pleasant Prairie Road, Prairie View Road. So yeah, this was all tall grass prairies with some savannas surrounding the prairie areas, you know, originally, but it wasn't all timber, but we do have dense timber along the streams. So, but yeah, there's no savannas left. They've all been turned into cornfields. So.
Perfect. Well, to wrap it up, Lynn, I want to hear your thoughts on the next opportunities, the future of your farm. You're the third generation you mentioned. What's next for your farm there, and where do you see it going?
Well, okay, so I think 12 months ago or 9 months ago, I would have said, I think we need to continue down the soil health pathway. Probably need to expand a little bit. I have not been real successful at renting ground, but hopefully my son could rent some ground. There's going to be a lot of turnover in the communities, I think, with farmers in the next decade. So maybe we can pick up some ground. And, I still think an integrated crop and livestock farm here in west central Missouri is good because we've got some ground that should not be in corn and soybeans. About 9 months ago, I had a utility company contact me about solar panels and renting my entire farm, or not the entire farm, but a lot of it, to put solar panels on. And so this goes into a long dive into a rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
So here's where I won't give you all the thought process, but because it's taken 8 months or 9 months to get to this decision. But Jerry, you probably know that there are more and more sheep being used under solar panels. It's called agrovoltaics. They're great. Instead of mowing, they're grazing for vegetation control. And I knew it was happening because of my involvement in the sheep industry. I did not realize the extent. And I didn't really realize the opportunity. And I didn't realize the potential for agriculture and the sheep industry to coexist with utility scale solar panels. And the more I looked at it, here's kind of where we came down. And it's not just my decision. My sister, my brother-in-law was involved in the decision-making process too. And there's a cousin involved and another neighbor involved. Anyway, if we sign this contract, it's basically tying up the ground for up to 45 years. This ground will never become a subdivision. It will never become a strip mall. It's never going to become a warehouse site as long as these solar panels are here, because you can't compete with the solar panels. We're basically signing a conservation easement to keep this in farm ground, in agriculture, for 45 years. And that was appealing to me. I don't think most people that talk about solar panels think about the fact that you're guaranteeing that ground's going to be used for agriculture for 45 years. They see it as an industrial site. We have bonding assurances from the company that there will be money to decommission the site when it's done. For what they were paying, it would make more sense for them to buy the ground than to rent it, but we'll cash the check. And so the company also offered something that I was amazed. Basically, they won't guarantee it's going to get grazed, but if it does, I have the first right of refusal for the grazing contract for my family. So the more I've studied this, maybe it won't be grazed for 40 years. There's research going on that there are a lot of vegetables that actually thrive under these solar panels because they want partial shade. And so, we're close to Kansas City. Why are we importing lettuce from Texas and California when it can be raised locally at least part of the year, not all the year, but at least 8 or 9 months out of the year? We could provide vegetables into Kansas City and generate more jobs per acre than I can raising corn and soybeans, or raising sheep, for that matter. I mean, we could actually use this as a way to revitalize rural communities with jobs. And so I can't predict what's going to happen, but I think there's a lot of opportunity if we look at this. And I honestly think it's going to, what's the term? Disruptive. We talk about Amazon was disruptive to e-commerce. Walmart was disruptive to small town Main Street. FedEx was disruptive to the shipping industry. I'm not too sure that solar panels aren't going to be disruptive to the sheep industry. I think we're going to see sheep move out of the Intermountain West, especially the southern Intermountain West, and be put under solar panels in the southeast and the Midwest. A friend of mine in Texas, when he was range sheep ranching, his weaning percentage was like 0.8 lambs per ewe, and now that he's under panels, he's at 1.4.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and then thinking about back to the previous conversations too about what you can put underneath those panels, like you said, anything that's not a C4 grass is going to benefit from partial shading at some point in the winter, in the heat of summer. So you maybe don't need endophyte tolerant fescue, or you don't need endophyte fescue. If you can have 30 to 40% shade in the middle of summer, you don't need that, right? Because you don't have the same heat stress as you would in a full sun. So you can actually graze more palatable, less toxic species underneath those panels.
The research that's been done on grazing is that even though they're covering about 50% of the ground or capturing 50% of the sunlight, the cool season grass production drops by only 5 or 10%.
Yeah, it's amazing. With no photorespiration, where we have a reversal of CO2 back in the atmosphere. So these conversations are interesting to me about solar because I had one of these last week with a young man from Minnesota who was going to be doing a solar farm, and he said there's no grazing areas in our part of the world, right? It's south central Minnesota. It is just flat tiled farmland, period. And they like cattle, right? They had a few, growing up. They had a dozen cows, in some waterways, and now they're going to put in a 200-acre solar farm. So he's going, we're going to have 100 cows, right? We're going to be ranchers, right? Because there's going to be an increased number of beef cows in our county because of solar, as a mixed use practice. Now, I still doubt that they're going to be able to graze cattle underneath there because of the rubbing and things like that. That might be an expensive learning process. But again, it's the sheep are that's been proven, right? We know that this has been working. This is not a novel concept. So interesting.
There's an organization called the American Solar Grazing Association, and again, I'll probably misquote this, but one of the leaders did the math on how many acres of solar panels that people think we're going to need in the United States in the next 20 years or whatever. And he extrapolated it back, and he says we need to grow the U.S. sheep flock by a factor of 4 if we graze all of it. Justin's eyes got really big.
Oh. Yeah. Most of those will be hair sheep because it just fits the system better.
Probably, although there's a guy in California that's raising fine wool sheep, and so it's going to be a mix, but
well,
but anyway, I mean that's, you think about, okay, number one, we don't have the slaughter capacity to do that. We're going to have to build slaughter plants and so I don't know that it's going to be that big, okay, but what happens if it's half of what he says?
We have to triple lamb output in this country just to meet domestic consumption.
Yeah, right? I know.
Just to meet domestic consumption, right? So the quadrupling is another line. Very interesting.
So anyway, so that's kind of that was a dive down a rabbit hole. But to answer your question of what's next, but we kind of thought we had it figured out, and then this curveball got thrown at us. And honestly, we had already talked to Samuel about having this plan to come back. And when I said, hey, this is a possibility, you could for about 3 seconds, it was just like, we made these plans and now it's going to be solar panels. And then he did the math. And it's like, I'll cash the check. It's insane money, but it's, whether you agree with all of the politics or not, right. I don't want to get into that, but I think it's going to allow us to secure our family's financial future, and honestly, Samuel can still be involved in agriculture. If he rents more ground, then, he has a passive income source in case he wants to do something crazy like trying to plant corn into standing rye, and if it doesn't work,
if it doesn't work, solar money to make up for it. So
he can try some crazy things to push the envelope on soil health if he wants to. So.
Yeah.
Well, Lynn, thank you so much for taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
Guys, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for everything that you and Millborn Seed does, and we just wish you all the continued success in pushing this crazy concept of soil health.
That's great stuff. Appreciate it, Lynn.
Okay.
All right, we'll see you.
Bye.
Well, we hope you enjoyed another episode of the Roots and Ruminants podcast. Let us know what you thought of it. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those social media things. And, if you ever have any questions, just give us a call. We've got a toll-free number here at 888-498-7333. Be glad to hear from you. Thank you.